My CEO fired me and called me pathetic, but he didn't know I already bought their debt. The stale air of the boardroom hung heavy, thick with the scent of old money and freshly brewed arrogance. Silas Thorne, his face flushed with a triumphant, almost giddy malice, leaned back in his plush leather chair, a predatory glint in his eyes. He had just finished a scathing public dissection of Kaelen Vance's supposed failures, each word a venomous jab designed to dismantle Kaelen's professional reputation, to strip him of any perceived worth. The words, sharp and precise, were meant to cut deep, to leave Kaelen exposed and humiliated before his peers. Kaelen, Silas had sneered, his voice booming, echoing off the polished mahogany table and the hushed faces of the other executives. You are, quite frankly, pathetic. Your meticulousness, your caution, it's not a virtue, it's a weakness. In this industry, one needs a killer instinct, a drive to dominate. You lack it. You always have. Thorne Industries doesn't need dead weight, especially not at the head of financial strategy. You're fired. Effective immediately. A ripple of nervous energy spread through the room. Some averted their gaze, uncomfortable, their discomfort a silent testament to Silas's casual cruelty. Others, Silas's sycophants, offered a faint, almost imperceptible smirk, their loyalty cemented by a shared enjoyment of another's downfall. They saw a man being publicly humiliated, his career seemingly crumbling before their very eyes. They saw a quiet, unassuming financial strategist finally being exposed as the failure Silas always claimed he was. They saw defeat. Kaelen could almost hear their internal murmurs, the quiet satisfaction of those who preferred the bombastic to the methodical. But as Silas basked in the silence, savoring his perceived victory, a strange calm settled over Kaelen. His heart rate remained steady, his breath even. He met Silas's gaze, not with anger, nor with desperation, but with a quiet, almost serene understanding. There was no flicker of panic in his eyes, no tremor in his hands. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that conveyed a tranquility utterly at odds with the situation. The faint scent of expensive cologne and fear hung in the air, but Kaelen felt only the cool clarity of a plan reaching its inevitable conclusion. Silas saw a man defeated, Kaelen saw a chess game nearing its final, undeniable checkmate. Silas saw Kaelen stripped bare, exposed. What he couldn't see, what he refused to comprehend, was that the very ground he stood on, the very empire he believed himself to be expanding, was already Kaelen's. The strings Silas thought he was cutting were, in fact, already tied to Kaelen's hand. He had called Kaelen pathetic, but what Silas didn't know was that Kaelen had already bought their debt. Every last crippling penny of it. The game had concluded long before Silas announced his winning move. Kaelen's silence wasn't a sign of surrender, it was the quiet before the earthquake. And the tremor, Kaelen knew, was about to begin. The sheer irony of the moment was almost comical, a secret Kaelen savored, knowing that Silas's smug satisfaction was about to be obliterated by a truth he was utterly unprepared for. The question wasn't if he would fall, but how spectacularly. And Kaelen Vance would be the one to orchestrate the descent. To understand how Kaelen arrived at that particular moment of serene defiance, one must first understand the journey that led him there, the silent battles fought long before Silas Thorne delivered his theatrical monologue. Kaelen joined Thorne Industries 6 years prior, a young but seasoned financial strategist with a reputation for meticulous planning and an almost uncanny ability to predict market shifts. He was drawn to the company's aggressive growth, its audacious expansion into new territories and technologies. He believed he could temper its more reckless tendencies with a foundation of solid, sustainable strategy. He saw potential, where others saw only the superficial shine of a burgeoning empire. He envisioned a future where Thorne Industries could be both bold and secure, a titan built on rock, not sand. From the outset, Kaelen's relationship with Silas Thorne was one of stark contrasts. Silas was a whirlwind of bombast and grand pronouncements, a man who measured success by the decibels of applause and the size of headlines. His office, a sprawling testament to his ego, was filled with oversized trophies and framed magazine covers featuring his perpetually grinning face. He thrived on public adulation, on the constant affirmation of his brilliance. Kaelen, on the other hand, preferred the quiet hum of data, the precision of a well-crafted spreadsheet. His personal workspace was minimalist, adorned only with a few strategic market charts and a single, well-worn copy of Graham and Dodd. His reports were comprehensive, his projections conservative yet accurate, often highlighting underlying vulnerabilities that Silas, in his hubris, dismissed as mere nitpicking. Kaelen remembered countless late nights poring over financial statements, the glow of his monitor illuminating the stark realities of the company's trajectory. He identified worrying trends: an over-reliance on short-term loans, increasingly precarious debt-to-equity ratios, and a reckless expansion into volatile markets. Each time, he meticulously compiled his findings, presenting them to Silas with calm, data-driven warnings. Silas, Kaelen would explain, his voice measured, his tone devoid of emotion, our cash flow projections indicate a significant squeeze within the next 18 months if we continue this trajectory. We need to diversify our credit sources, perhaps consider a strategic divestment of the newer, less profitable ventures. Silas would wave him off with a dismissive flick of his hand, often mid-sentence, his eyes already glazing over, already looking past Kaelen to the next grand pronouncement. Kaelen, Kaelen, he'd chuckle, a condescending sound that grated on Kaelen's nerves. Always the harbinger of doom, aren't you? We are innovators, Kaelen, not bean counters. Fortune favors the bold, not the timid. Go back to your numbers, I'll handle the vision. His vision, Kaelen quickly realized, was blind ambition, untethered by any semblance of financial reality. It was a vision of endless growth, fueled by borrowed money and a complete disregard for risk. Kaelen's dedication, his sacrifices, were often invisible to Silas. He was the one who worked weekends, holidays, ensuring every financial model was robust, every risk accounted for. He salvaged countless deals that were on the brink of collapse due to Silas's impulsive decisions. He quietly patched holes, shoring up crumbling foundations, often reworking entire financial proposals from scratch after Silas had boasted about a done deal that was, in reality, a house of cards. He did it not for Silas's recognition, which he knew would never come, but for the integrity of the work, for the quiet satisfaction of mastering complex financial puzzles. Each quiet win was a small, personal triumph, a testament to the power of foresight over folly. He found a deep, almost meditative satisfaction in the precision of his work, in seeing the intricate gears of finance turn exactly as predicted, even when others remained oblivious to the underlying mechanics. The true turning point came about 2 years ago. Kaelen had been tracking the company's long-term debt obligations, particularly a series of unsecured bonds issued during a period of rapid, largely unchecked expansion. His analysis revealed a ticking time bomb. These bonds, while seemingly manageable in the short term, represented an enormous liability that would mature simultaneously within 3 to 5 years, creating a financial cliff Thorne Industries was ill-equipped to navigate. He presented this to Silas with a detailed plan for early repayment and restructuring, outlining a phased approach that would mitigate the risk without stifling growth. Silas's response? He laughed. Kaelen, you worry too much. The market will bail us out. We'll acquire another company, pump up the stock, and pay off those silly bonds with a fraction of the profits. Think big, Kaelen, not small. It was in that moment, seeing the utter disdain for financial prudence in Silas's eyes, that Kaelen knew. Thorne Industries, under Silas's leadership, was doomed. Not by a sudden market crash, but by its own self-inflicted wounds, by the slow, insidious erosion of financial discipline. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. And a chilling thought began to form in Kaelen's mind, not born of malice, but of cold, calculated opportunity. If Thorne Industries was destined to collapse under its own weight, why shouldn't Kaelen be the one to pick up the pieces? The idea, initially a fleeting whisper, solidified into a concrete plan, a monumental undertaking that would require every ounce of his skill, patience, and resolve. Kaelen's secret weapon wasn't a person, nor was it a piece of software. It was knowledge, foresight, and an unparalleled understanding of complex financial instruments. He saw the impending collapse not as an end, but as an opportunity. The unsecured debt, the very thing that would cripple Thorne Industries, represented an asset if acquired strategically. It was a distressed asset waiting to be scooped up by someone with the vision to see beyond the immediate chaos. Over the next 18 months, Kaelen embarked on the most complex and secretive financial maneuver of his career. His goal was audacious: to acquire a controlling stake in Thorne Industries' crippling debt. This wasn't something he could do openly, or even through direct means. The slightest hint of his activities would alert Silas and the wider market, driving up the prices of the very debt he sought to acquire. He leveraged every contact, every obscure financial vehicle he knew. He established a series of shell corporations, meticulously layered and legally airtight, across various jurisdictions, from the labyrinthine banking systems of Switzerland to the discreet trust laws of the Cayman Islands. He used offshore accounts, discreet private equity firms, and even some lesser-known investment funds to slowly, painstakingly, acquire small tranches of the debt. It was like assembling a gigantic jigsaw puzzle, each piece a fragment of Thorne Industries' future, bought at a discount from increasingly nervous creditors who were desperate to offload their exposure to a company they sensed was heading for trouble. He sold off a significant portion of his personal assets, his spacious, light-filled apartment in the city, his small but carefully curated portfolio of blue-chip stocks, even his antique watch collection, a cherished inheritance from his grandfather. It was a terrifying gamble, a leap of faith rooted in his unwavering conviction that his financial predictions were sound. He lived frugally, moving into a modest rental, his life consumed by this single, monumental task. Sleep became a luxury, meals an afterthought. Each successful acquisition, no matter how small, was a quiet victory, a confirmation of his hypothesis. The Zeigarnik effect was in full swing. Every incomplete transaction, every pending deal, kept his mind racing, pushing him forward, ensuring no detail was overlooked. The curiosity gap for him was not knowing if he could truly pull it off, if he could amass enough debt without alerting Silas or the wider market. It was a tightrope walk over an abyss, and the slightest misstep could mean financial ruin. Kaelen became a ghost, moving through the financial shadows, leaving no trace. No one, not his colleagues, not even the most astute market analysts, could have connected Kaelen Vance, head of financial strategy, with the enigmatic entities quietly buying up distressed Thorne Industries debt. Silas was too busy chasing flashy new ventures, too engrossed in his own self-aggrandizing narrative to notice the subtle, systematic hemorrhaging beneath the surface. He saw Kaelen's continued presence as a sign of his weakness, his inability to leave, rather than the strategic positioning of a predator. He saw a man tied to his desk. Kaelen saw a spider carefully weaving its web, strand by silent strand. As the months turned into a year, then into nearly two, Kaelen's plan quietly, meticulously unfolded. He continued to perform his duties as head of financial strategy with unwavering professionalism, a testament to his ability to compartmentalize. He attended meetings, offered his usual data-driven insights, which, predictably, continued to be ignored, and managed his team with the same quiet efficiency. He maintained his routine, a deliberate facade of normalcy, even as his internal world hummed with the clandestine operation. Silas, blinded by his own ego, continued to steer Thorne Industries closer and closer to the very financial cliff Kaelen had warned him about. His arrogance wasn't just a character flaw, it was a strategic advantage for Kaelen. Silas interpreted Kaelen's quiet diligence as tacit submission, his lack of outward ambition as weakness. He saw a loyal, if somewhat pathetic, employee. Kaelen saw an unwitting accomplice in his own downfall. Silas would often boast about the company's bold new directions, describing them in soaring terms to rapt audiences, while Kaelen knew those directions were leading straight into a cul-de-sac of debt. He'd announce new acquisitions, lauded in the press as aggressive expansion, and Kaelen would be behind the scenes, watching as the company's liquid assets dwindled further, and the need for new, expensive financing increased. Each new loan, each new bond issuance Silas initiated, was another opportunity for Kaelen to subtly, indirectly, acquire more of the existing debt at increasingly distressed prices. His network of discreet intermediaries worked tirelessly, picking off fragments of the company's future liabilities like vultures circling a dying beast. Kaelen remembered one particularly egregious instance. Silas had pushed through a massive, high-interest loan to acquire a failing tech startup, purely for the optics of diversification and to satisfy his own desire for public accolades. Kaelen had provided a detailed risk assessment, highlighting the startup's negative cash flow, its limited synergy with Thorne Industries' core business, and its inflated valuation. He had even presented alternative, less risky investment opportunities. Silas dismissed it as typical Kaelen caution, publicly ridiculing his lack of vision in a senior management meeting. A few weeks later, Kaelen's anonymous shell company was able to acquire a significant chunk of Thorne Industries' older, less attractive debt at a 30% discount, as nervous institutional investors sought to reduce their exposure after the questionable acquisition. Silas's recklessness was directly fueling Kaelen's strategic accumulation. He was digging his own grave, and Kaelen was quietly, methodically, buying the shovels, piece by piece. Kaelen's colleagues, though aware of his quiet brilliance and often sought his informal advice on their own departmental budgets, were equally aware of his limited influence over Silas. They saw him as the good soldier, the one who kept the ship afloat despite the captain's erratic steering. They empathized with his often ignored warnings, perhaps even pitted his quiet resilience in the face of Silas's overbearing nature. This public perception, that Kaelen was merely a diligent but ultimately powerless employee, was crucial to his plan. It ensured no one suspected the true extent of his activities, the silent war he was waging right under their noses. They saw a man dedicated to his craft. They had no idea he was systematically dismantling the edifice from within. The mounting pressure on Thorne Industries' financials became increasingly evident to anyone who cared to look beyond Silas's bombastic press releases. Suppliers were demanding faster payments, credit lines were tightening, and whispers of liquidity issues began to circulate in the market, amplified by the increasing nervousness of small-time investors. Silas, however, doubled down on his arrogance, viewing any criticism as a personal attack, any caution as a lack of vision. He pushed his executives harder, demanded impossible sales targets, and became even more dismissive of Kaelen's financial counsel, often cutting him off mid-sentence with a dismissive wave. He was lashing out, blind to the true nature of the storm gathering around him, attributing all problems to external factors or the timidity of his own team. The Zeigarnik effect was now working on Silas, too. His increasing financial anxiety, though misdirected, kept him agitated and focused on short-term wins rather than systemic issues, exactly as Kaelen needed him to be. He was so busy swatting at gnats, he failed to notice the python coiling around his empire, tightening its grip with each passing day. The pieces were now perfectly aligned. Kaelen had amassed a controlling stake in Thorne Industries' unsecured debt, enough to trigger a default and force a restructuring, or even outright liquidation, should the company fail to meet its obligations. The due date for a significant portion of that debt was rapidly approaching, a date Kaelen knew Thorne Industries, in its current state, could never meet. The stage was set. Silas, in his ignorance, had simply provided the perfect, public platform for the grand finale. His decision to fire Kaelen, calling him pathetic, was not an obstacle, but an unwitting invitation to reveal the true nature of his precarious position. He thought he was closing a chapter. In reality, he was merely turning the page to the climax of Kaelen's story, a story of quiet vengeance and strategic brilliance. The boardroom was buzzing, a nervous energy thick in the air. The annual shareholder meeting was underway, a usually predictable affair of corporate platitudes and carefully curated financial summaries. Silas, looking even more puffed up than usual, his suit impeccably tailored, stood at the podium, basking in the glow of the spotlights, delivering his keynote address. He spoke of resilience, of market leadership, of a bold new future for Thorne Industries, all while omitting any mention of the company's precarious financial footing. He had just finished a particularly self-congratulatory anecdote about his instinct saving a deal, when he gestured towards Kaelen's now empty seat at the executive table. And sometimes, Silas boomed, a sneer twisting his lips, the words dripping with casual disdain, you have to prune the dead wood. Some people just don't have the stomach for true innovation, for the kind of aggressive growth we pursue here at Thorne. They're content to be pathetic, to hide behind numbers. We've moved past that era. A hush fell over the room. His words, a direct reference to Kaelen's recent firing, hung in the air, a final public humiliation. He smiled, a self-satisfied grin, his eyes scanning the room for approving nods. It was Kaelen's cue. Kaelen had been sitting in the back of the room, near the emergency exit, deliberately inconspicuous, observing the theatrics with detached amusement. Now, he rose slowly, calmly, and began to walk down the central aisle, towards the podium. Every head turned, a wave of curiosity and confusion rippling through the gathered shareholders and executives. Whispers erupted, quickly dying down as Kaelen's unmistakable presence registered. Silas, momentarily flustered by Kaelen's unexpected appearance, narrowed his eyes, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Kaelen? What are you doing? You're no longer an employee here. This is a private meeting. His voice was laced with irritation, a hint of genuine surprise, and a rising note of unease. The carefully constructed narrative of his triumph was being interrupted. Kaelen reached the front of the room, stopping directly in front of the podium, his calm demeanor an unsettling contrast to the growing tension. His gaze swept over the shareholders, the board members, the executives, many of whom had, just moments ago, offered their silent agreement to Silas's pronouncements. He noted the sudden shifts in their postures, the faint tightening around their eyes as they tried to decipher his purpose. Indeed, Mr. Thorne, Kaelen began, his voice clear, steady, cutting through the silence like a finely honed blade. Kaelen Vance is no longer an employee. But Kaelen Vance is an interested party. A very interested party. Silas scoffed, a forced, brittle sound. Oh, you're here to beg for your job back? Kaelen thought Silas had made himself clear. Kaelen ignored his taunt. From the inside pocket of his impeccably tailored suit jacket, he produced a slim, bound document. It wasn't thick, but its contents were heavier than gold, carrying the weight of years of planning and silent execution. He held it up, allowing everyone to see its stark, official cover, a simple title emblazoned on it, Consolidated Debt Instruments, Thorne Industries. Actually, Mr. Thorne, Kaelen continued, his voice gaining a quiet authority that commanded attention, filling the cavernous room with an unexpected power, Kaelen Vance is here to clarify Thorne Industries' future, and by extension, your own. As of this morning, all of Thorne Industries' outstanding unsecured debt, the very liabilities that are due to mature in a mere 3 weeks and which the company has no means to repay, has been consolidated. And it has been acquired. A low murmur started to ripple through the room, like wind rustling through dry leaves. Silas's eyes widened, a flicker of something that looked like dawning comprehension mixed with disbelief. The color began to drain from his face. Acquired? What are you talking about? That's impossible. We've been negotiating with the creditors, diligently working towards an extension. Oh, you have, Kaelen conceded with a faint, almost imperceptible smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But those negotiations were ultimately futile. Because those creditors no longer hold the debt. Kaelen Vance does. He paused, allowing the words to sink in, watching the realization dawn on faces around the room. The murmurs grew into a confused din, then into shocked gasps. Silas's face, which had been flushed with triumph moments ago, now began to pale, a sickly gray taking its place. His jaw sagged slightly. Kaelen Vance spent the last 2 years quietly acquiring a controlling stake in Thorne Industries' debt, he explained, his voice calm, methodical, as if delivering a routine financial report, each word a hammer blow to Silas's carefully constructed reality. Every bond, every loan, every significant liability that you so recklessly accumulated, Kaelen systematically bought. Through various entities, through meticulous, untraceable transactions designed to leave no public footprint. This document, he gestured to the slim binder in his hand, is the official notarized and legally binding proof. It shows that over 80% of your unsecured debt is now owned by a consortium of entities under Kaelen Vance's direct control. Silas stared at him, his mouth agape. His bluster had completely evaporated, replaced by utter shock. His eyes darted around the room, as if seeking confirmation of the nightmare unfolding before him. You bought our debt? Why? How could you? His voice was a strangled whisper, barely audible. Because Kaelen Vance saw the writing on the wall, Mr. Thorne, Kaelen stated, his voice losing its calm, detached tone for a moment, replaced by a quiet intensity that commanded the absolute attention of everyone present. Kaelen warned you, repeatedly, about the reckless trajectory Thorne Industries was on. He provided solutions, strategies for sustainable growth. You dismissed him. You called him pathetic. You chose to ignore the fundamental principles of financial prudence in favor of your own ego. And in doing so, you created an opportunity for someone who understood the true value of foresight, who saw not a failing company, but a distressed asset waiting to be revitalized. Kaelen looked directly at Silas, his gaze unwavering, stripping away the last vestiges of the man's carefully cultivated image. The company, as it stands, is insolvent. It cannot meet its upcoming obligations. And as the majority debt holder, Kaelen Vance is now legally positioned to initiate a restructuring, or if necessary, to force liquidation. Thorne Industries, Mr. Thorne, is no longer yours to run into the ground. It is, effectively, Kaelen Vance's to save. Or dismantle. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sharp intake of breath from various individuals in the room. The carefully constructed facade of Silas Thorne's empire had just crumbled, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating precision of a man who saw the end long before anyone else. The air crackled with the energy of shattered illusions. The immediate aftermath of Kaelen's revelation was a chaotic maelstrom. Silas Thorne, his face a mask of disbelief, then horror, then pure, incandescent rage, lunged at Kaelen, only to be restrained by a couple of the more sensible board members who had, until that moment, been frozen in their seats. His shouts of treason and impossible were drowned out by the rising clamor of the shareholders, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and dawning panic. The room erupted into a cacophony of questions and accusations, a whirlwind of disbelief. The board members, those who had either silently enabled or nervously tolerated Silas's reign, were visibly shaken. Their expressions ranged from utter bewilderment to a sudden, sickening realization of the precariousness of their own positions. Kaelen saw faces he recognized from previous meetings, individuals who had nodded along to Silas's empty promises, now contorted in expressions of profound regret. Some of them approached Kaelen cautiously, their voices hushed, seeking clarification, their eyes now seeing him not as the quiet strategist they had dismissed, but as a formidable, almost mythological figure who had orchestrated an impossible coup, a financial phantom. Within hours, the news had leaked to the financial press. The headlines screamed across every major news outlet: Thorne Industries on the brink, ex-head of strategy reveals secret debt acquisition, CEO Silas Thorne's empire crumbles, the quiet architect, Kaelen Vance's masterstroke. The company's stock, already volatile, plummeted to near zero, trading halted within minutes of the news breaking. Credit agencies downgraded Thorne Industries' rating to junk, effectively cutting off any hope of fresh financing, sealing its fate. The phone lines at Thorne Industries were jammed with frantic calls from minor creditors, desperate suppliers, and increasingly, former employees seeking answers, their livelihoods hanging in the balance. Silas Thorne's downfall was swift and absolute. The board, faced with irrefutable legal documentation and the immediate threat of total collapse, had no choice but to initiate bankruptcy proceedings. He was immediately stripped of his CEO title, his name tarnished beyond repair. He was escorted out of the building, his once imposing figure now appearing strangely shrunken and pathetic, a shadow of his former self. The irony was not lost on Kaelen. Silas had called him that word, and now, it perfectly described his own ignominious exit. The company, the very entity he had so carelessly driven to the brink, was now in the hands of the very person he had dismissed as insignificant. The next few months were grueling, consumed by the complex process of bankruptcy and restructuring. As the primary debt holder, Kaelen was appointed to oversee the liquidation of certain non-core assets and the strategic reorganization of others. It was a messy, painful process, fraught with legal battles and emotional appeals, but one Kaelen approached with the same meticulous calm he had brought to his financial strategies. He ensured that employees were treated fairly, offering severance packages and assistance in finding new roles where possible. He saw to it that suppliers received at least partial payment, mitigating the ripple effect of the collapse. And most importantly, he ensured that the company's most valuable, sustainable divisions were salvaged, stripped of the dead weight and reckless investments that had nearly destroyed them. His goal was never simply destruction, but a pragmatic re-evaluation and rebuilding, a chance to forge something solid from the wreckage. It has been 2 years since that dramatic day in the boardroom. Thorne Industries, under new leadership and a vastly different, more ethical business model, has emerged from bankruptcy. It's a leaner, more focused company, built on the principles of financial prudence and sustainable growth that Silas so vehemently rejected. Kaelen chose not to take the CEO position, opting instead to serve as a strategic advisor and a major shareholder in the newly formed entity. His true passion lies in strategy, in seeing the unseen, in building rather than managing. He's since invested in several other struggling companies, applying the same principles of foresight and strategic acquisition, turning distress into opportunity, quiet transformations from the inside out. Kaelen's life now is one of quiet satisfaction. The financial freedom he achieved allows him to pursue projects that genuinely interest him, to work with people who value intellect over ego, who appreciate the quiet power of a well-executed plan. He lives modestly, investing his time and resources into ventures that align with his values, ventures that seek sustainable growth rather than fleeting, ego-driven expansion. The public humiliation he once endured has transformed into a quiet legend within the financial circles, a story told of precision, patience, and the devastating power of underestimation. Silas Thorne, Kaelen hears, attempted to launch a few new ventures, but his reputation, irrevocably tarnished, proved an insurmountable obstacle. He lives in a shadow of his former self, a cautionary tale of unchecked arrogance, a man forever haunted by the quiet strategist he once dismissed. Kaelen bears him no ill will. Silas was simply a catalyst, an unwitting participant in a lesson he needed to learn, a pawn moved into position by a force he never saw coming. The greatest lesson Kaelen gleaned from that entire ordeal is a profound one. True power doesn't reside in volume or bluster, nor in the fleeting adulation of others. It resides in foresight, in patience, and in the quiet, disciplined execution of a well-conceived strategy. It's in the ability to see what others miss, to plan when others panic, and to act when others merely react. Sometimes, the most devastating checkmate is delivered not by a roaring king, but by a quiet pawn, meticulously moved into place, piece by piece, until the game is irreversibly won. Never underestimate the quiet ones, for their silence often hides the sharpest minds and the most formidable plans. If you enjoyed Kaelen Vance's incredible story of foresight and quiet power, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on similar tales of strategic brilliance. What was the most surprising moment for you in Kaelen's journey? Do you think Silas Thorne ever truly understood what happened to him? Share your thoughts in the comments below.